All right. Good afternoon, Zimbabwe, and welcome to Zimbabwe Daily. My name is Yvonne, and I do hope I find all of you well. This is Friend Talk, a program where we bring you conversations that matter. And today, we are talking COVID-19 and the aspect of schools closure. We want to understand if this is a safety precaution or it's a merely abdication of duty by the government. We understand that in an Afrobarometer research findings that were done, 81% of the population felt that Zimbabwe government had taken good measures towards prevention of COVID-19 spread. According to the findings, Zimbabweans broadly commend the government for its response to the COVID-19 pandemic. 81% said it managed the response fairly well and very well, and 84% say it kept the public informed. 4 out of 5 respondents, that's 81% of the research area, endorsed lockdowns and school closures to curb the spread of COVID-19, although most say lockdowns were difficult to comply with and schools should have reopened sooner. So today we want to look at the aspect of schools, and they are remaining closed at the moment. We continue to have lockdowns being extended by another 2 weeks, since July. So we want to know if this is just a safety precaution or an abdication of duty on the part of government. How are other countries doing it? So we have experiences from Malawi, we have experiences from the United States of America, and we'll obviously get experiences from Zimbabwe. So I'll allow my guests today to introduce themselves. I'll start with you, Andrew. Please introduce yourselves to our viewers.
Hi, my name is Andrew Savage. I am a New York City public school teacher in New York City in the United States. And I have been a teacher in the United States for about 11 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrew. We seem to have lost Comrade Kamaliza from Comrade Kamaliza from Malawi there. We seem to be having network issues, but we'll allow them to join us along the way. Now, Andrew, I'll come to you, as it were. What is the situation in the United States, and in particular the area that you are operating from, Staten Island? Where exactly is that, and what is the situation in terms of schools? Are they open? Are they closed? What has been the response of your government towards schools since 2020, and where we are today in 2021?
Well, I'm a teacher in Brooklyn, which is another borough in New York City. I live on Staten Island. I could tell you a little bit about where the situation stands on Staten Island. Like the rest of the United States, New York City, Staten Island in particular, our case numbers are rising because of the Delta variant and because of people who are not vaccinated are much more likely to experience disease. So our case numbers are rising, but in terms of schools, we're on summer break right now, which means most students are not in school. I just got done teaching summer school for students who needed to make up credits. And that was the closest thing to a normal school experience that I've had in over a year and a half. Because last year we had almost all online learning. In September, we tried a hybrid model where students went to school part of the time, and then part of the time they were home. Another cohort or group of students stayed at home full time, and so they just learned exclusively online. And so when it comes to the response of government, the messages have been a little mixed, and the decisions have been very last minute. The mayor of New York City controls the school system here, and so his communication about what the expectations are and what the plans are for certain scenarios involving the pandemic have been really subpar. They haven't really communicated with families well. In addition, this September, there doesn't seem to be a remote option for students in New York City the way there was last year, because the goal in New York City for the mayor was to get everybody back in person. And I think the logic behind that was, well, we have vaccines, we have all these things now that can mitigate the pandemic, but we also have to consider the little kids who, from ages 5 to 12, who are not yet eligible for the vaccine and could be vessels for spread of the disease. So I would say the response of government here has been lackluster, because their communication with teachers, with students, with families about what's happening in September hasn't really been good. We're starting school for students September 13th. That's a little under a month from now. And we still don't really have a complete picture of what it's going to look like in total in the fall.
All right. You said something there that I captured, and I just want to, for clarity's sake, you said the mayor controls what happens in the school. Is that correct?
Yes. In New York City, we have a system called mayoral control, which is the state of New York gives the city of New York, the mayors in particular, control of decisions involving the school system.
I see. So the mayors are the ones who get info. Do they wait for government directives, or they deal with the situations on the ground by themselves?
Well, in the United States, there are different ways that schools are operated and controlled. So most places around the country have localized school districts, and sometimes mayors or county executives control those, and then sometimes there are elected school boards that control those. In New York City, a long time ago, we used to have an elected school board. We haven't for about 20 years. When Mayor Bloomberg was mayor of New York City, he switched the system over to mayoral control. And now, ever since, the mayor has controlled those decisions. You asked about, do they listen to guidance and government directives? Yes, when it comes to the pandemic, they try to do that. They do try and listen. For example, we were looking at a situation in September, and if you were to ask me in June, would we have masks on in the classroom in September, I would probably said no, because the CDC guidance has at that time said vaccinated people don't need to wear masks and don't have to quarantine for the way that unvaccinated people do. Now, because of the increased spread, we are going to be wearing masks, because they are taking the CDC guidance as it comes, which is every few weeks at this point.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for that clarification. Mr. Kamaliza, can you hear me? Mr. Kamaliza? Right, we seem to have connection challenges. Mr. Kamaliza is coming through from Malawi, and we wanted to get an appreciation of what's happening in Malawi, because from the information that we have, they did not close schools because of the pandemic. They continued with learning. So I wanted to find out how they were doing it, if there were any emergency cases that arose due to their remaining opening. So we seem to be having connection problems there, but we'll continue to try to reach out to him, and probably if you can just send us voice notes via WhatsApp. Also, please, if you are watching us, you can send a voice note via WhatsApp on 0774 107 682. Let me put that on the screen. If you're watching and you'd also want to just share experiences, do feel free to do that on the following number. It's a Zimbabwean number. It is on WhatsApp. So if you want to also have your own views in terms of government response and action towards reopening of schools, do feel free to send in your voice notes via WhatsApp on the number that is showing on your screens. Right. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue with this conversation. Join us shortly. Right. The situation in Zimbabwe regarding COVID-19 and its effect, according to the Afrobarometer findings, almost a half of Zimbabweans say they lost a job, business, or primary source of income due to COVID-19. And we also have a situation where parents have been asking if they were going to continue into the third term using money that they paid, the school fees that they paid in the second term, which essentially slipped away without the reopening. So would want to hear from you, if your child is in government school, what has been the remedial actions taken to ensure that your child continues to be educated. So we're expecting to have Lorraine, who is a Zimbabwean teacher, to share her experiences. Also, do feel free to write in on our Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter channels in terms of this conversation that we're having. Now, Andrew, parents, what do parents really understand what is happening? Like you said, there was a scenario where vaccinated people were told they can go in public without their masks. They don't need to, social isolate and all that. But then information comes back and says, actually, you need to exercise social distancing, you need to keep sanitizing, and you need to wear your mask. Now, in that scenario, are the parents keen for the schools to open at this particular time?
Well, there's a divide, certainly, among whether that should happen or not. I think most people are in agreement that schools should open in some fashion. I think for the last year or so, we've had enough of the online stuff. But where parents, I think, are frustrated is just, what do those protocols look like? How much distance are we talking about? Are we talking about 6 feet? Are we talking about 3 feet in a classroom? Are we going to, what are the protocols when somebody tests positive? Those things are unclear in our school system to a lot of parents.
There seem to be a lot of there seem not to be much information around behavior of people around this COVID-19 scenario in schools. Comrade Kamaliza, welcome to Zimbabwe Daily, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Apologies for late joining.
No, that's fine. We realized that your network was giving issues. Maybe you can start by telling us the Malawian experience during the COVID-19 pandemic season. Tell us how your school system has been operating.
All right. As for Malawi, just like other countries, when we had registered first confirmed cases of COVID, the government of Malawi had declared a health emergency and declared a national disaster, and then closed our public schools. All learning institutions in the country were ordered to close on 23rd March. And then when all the institutions were closed, there was a plan to consider first school opening. And then the phase one was done in September 2020, only for those classes, only for examination classes. That's Form 4 in secondary school, Standard 8 in primary school, as well as those who are in fourth year in the universities. So this was more like a pilot phase for school opening. And during this pilot phase, the government was there to observe adherence to set safety guidelines which the government had set to ensure safe reopening. And then phase two of school opening was done in October 2020. That's when all the remaining schools, all the remaining classes were closed. Many were reopened. And then that was followed by another indefinite school closure in January 2021. That was the time when now Malawi was registering a lot of COVID cases, and also the death cases due to COVID were on the increase. So the government of Malawi ordered for reclosure of all the schools in January. And then come February 2021, that's when the government of Malawi fully reopened all the school learning institutions, regardless of whether it's an examination class or the rest. So from there up now, our schools have remained open.
Excellent. And what's the school calendar for Malawi like? What does it look like? How many terms do you have in a year?
Basically, we have 3 terms in an academic year. So, yeah, we have 3 terms of about 3 months each, and then holidays varies, but the longest term is the end of year or end of academic year semester. That's the one which has mostly the longest holiday.
I see. And Andrew, what's your school year like?
2 semesters. We have from September through January, and then we have January through June, and then we have summer break.
I see. Oh, okay. All right. No, that's fine. I think we are clear on that. If you're joining us live, we are coming to you talking about closure of schools, whether it's a precautionary safety precaution or it's just abdication of duty on the part of government. So we brought in our friends from the United States of America and from Malawi so that we share experiences, what is happening in their own countries and how they've managed to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and school opening or closure. And we are learning that in the United States, they have 2 semesters, September through to January. And you said September through to January.
Yes, that's.
And then January through to June.
Yes.
So in other words, you learn from September to June.
Pretty much, yeah. We have 180 days that we have to fill for the school year legally.
Oh, wow. Okay. And in Malawi, we have 3 terms of 3 months, which I think is basically the same concept with Zimbabwe. We have 3 terms of 3 months. Now, is the closure of schools a solution? Do you feel in the United States, to start off with, do you feel that the closure of the schools was a solution to the COVID-19 pandemic, or because it's a new virus, it's a new experience that we've all had to go through, it's also trial and error?
Well, certainly in the beginning, it was absolutely necessary, I believe, to close schools.
Right.
In New York City in particular, the class size limit is 34 students to a classroom with 1 teacher. Sometimes if it's a class that includes students with learning disabilities, that includes 2 teachers. So we're talking about, let's say in a class with 2 teachers, 34 students, so that's 36 people in a room. So that's a petri dish for disease spread in this kind of a situation. So when we initially had the pandemic, it was absolutely necessary to close the schools, but also as we move forward to do schooling in some kind of modified fashion, which is where the online and remote learning comes in. And that requires a lot of infrastructure, that requires a lot of technology to be able to do that. And not all students had access to that kind of technology. So the schools in New York City and the Department of Education in New York City oftentimes had to provide the technology to students to engage in the learning. But now I think it's a different situation. Now, at least in the United States, we have vaccines that are widely available at this point. The one issue, as I said earlier, that we do have to mitigate is smaller children, younger children between the ages of 5 and 12. We have to make them eligible to receive the vaccine so they can go into school safely without worrying about whether they're going to catch COVID. But we also have the vaccines as a solution to teachers who are concerned about maybe going into a situation where they have 25 or 30 students in a classroom. So we need to have access to vaccines, we need to have proper safety protocols, and we need clear communication. And at least in New York City, communication has been flawed, to say the least.
Right, communication continues to be an issue. And even if you are to look at our Zimbabwe scenario, a lot of people are moving away from the whole vaccination thingy because it has been communicated as if it's the alpha and omega of our lives. So you raise the issues that there's need for more access to the vaccination and to make the 5 to 12-year-olds eligible for vaccination so that they are safe. I want to introduce Mr. Obed Masaraore, the R2's president, and I want him to give us a sneak peek into the Zimbabwe situation in terms of schools. What has been, Mr. Masaraore, welcome.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Can you give us, an outlook of what the situation in Zimbabwe has been like, especially with the schools?
Okay, thank you so much. So it's very unfortunate that the Zimbabwean calendar, we are supposed to have at least 3 learning terms: the first term, second term, and third term. And we failed to open our second term, and we are not sure if we are going to be able to open the third term. Why? Because when we close schools, because of the when we closed the schools because of COVID-19, the government failed to institute safety measures within our schools so that they could be able to open. But most importantly, there's the issue of teacher incapacitation. The government have not been paying teacher salaries. So at the end of the day, COVID-19 in our scenario is now being used as an excuse by government, because if schools are going to be opening, we are not only worried about COVID-19 safety, we are also worried that the majority of our teachers will not be able to show up for work. They will not be able to report for duty because they are not earning a salary that can enable them to travel to work or get food. So, for example, the order teacher in Zimbabwe at the moment earns around slightly above 100 US dollars. This is not enough to cover the basics, be it food, rentals. So in our case, COVID-19 becomes an excuse for a government which is not prepared to fund for learning. If they don't pay the teachers, if they don't fund the adherence to standard operating procedures, if they don't assist vulnerable learners to access teaching and learning materials, then no learning can take place in our schools. Then obviously COVID-19 becomes an excuse, and the government is afraid that if they open the schools, we will have the salary crisis would be exposed. So it seems as if it's now convenient to keep the schools permanently closed. It is also very unfortunate that we have not been pursuing the alternative routes for teaching, the idea of remote teaching, for example. It is very unfortunate that only those schools with the access to online platforms are giving some form of learning to some form of education to our learners, and the majority are completely shut out.
You paint a very grim, picture, President Masaraore. What has been the experience of our rural students in the rural areas in terms of learning during this COVID-19 induced lockdown and school closures?
Okay, thank you so much. I think if we are going to be looking at the report that was produced by the education cluster for 2020, it is so clear that outside even the rural, around almost less than 30% of our learners managed to access education, and the situation was dire in our rural communities. They did not even get support from they're not receiving learning instruction, be it through radio, be it through parent instruction, be it through teachers. So it is very dire in the rural areas. And we now have the issue of child marriages. The children are getting married, they're getting pregnant. We have the issue of child labor. Our learners are spending most of their time in tobacco fields. They don't have time to access any form of education. Some are now engaging in drugs. You name it, the list is endless. And we are so worried that millions are going to fail to return to school whenever we are going to open. Already almost 1 million have already dropped out, according to official reports. When schools opened earlier on this year, almost 1 million million had dropped out, and more are going to drop out, and some are now even failing to register for examinations which are due this year because they failed to pay the examination fees that were required. As you spoke to earlier on, incomes have been wiped away. So yeah, the situation is very dire in the rural communities.
All right. Comrade Kamaliza, do you have such situations in Malawi as well? How is the teacher welfare situation like in your own country?
All right. Thank you very much. I think it's quite similar to what the recent comrade has shared, because mostly during the time when the government had ordered for closure of schools, Malawi had also experienced a lot of challenges, especially in terms of increased pregnancies amongst boys and among girls. Also, early marriages were on an increase, and also when the schools were reopened, a significant number of school-going children had not managed to come back to school because most of them were engulfed, for example, just like in Zimbabwe, for example, in child labor, in child marriages, and also others, for example, indulging themselves in drug and substance abuse. So during the period of school closure, for sure, we had lost a significant number of learners who did not manage to come back to school. Yeah, so I think that's what I can share.
Okay, thank you so much, Comrade. And Andrew, do you guys have such a problem as well in the States?
We did have issues when it came to students not engaging, certainly in remote learning when we were in the remote learning period. Certainly, it doesn't add up to the gravity of the issues that the other panelists talked about just now, but certainly we do have issues where students were not engaging in the work the way that we had hoped during the remote learning period. I actually just got done last week teaching summer school for students who needed to make up credits for their classes, and there were more than in previous years. And so that indicated very strongly that remote learning had taken a toll because, when, at least for us, when the students are at home, there's not that sense of structure. There's not that sense of urgency. Well, I need to get this done by this time. I need to do this work. I need to log on to this class because you're at home. So you're given the illusion that you could do what you want when you want. And so it's not the same structure as a everyday school environment, certainly.
Right. It's giving me an impression that even remote learning where it has taken place, there have been challenges of that lack of structure that you highlight, Andrew, and just lack of engagement. The parents who are supposed to help the children are also busy trying to engage. I was saying that during the lockdown period, it was actually one of the biggest season of my life because there was one online program after the next, online meeting after the next, and sometimes it went beyond the normal working hours because everyone would think it's just a virtual conference, so we can do it at 8 p.m. at night when people are having family time and all that. So Mr. Masaraure, even if I know you've highlighted a very grim picture in Zimbabwe, which is our lived reality on a daily basis, but I want to ask that even if government were to introduce remote learning, do you think it's going to make much of a difference, given the experience even that Mr. Savage just shared with us here?
Yeah, indeed. It is going to make a big difference. I think we have to be contextual when we introduce remote learning. It should not be a one size fits all. It should be contextual, and we must employ resources which are available in different contexts. So we should not have a remote learning strategy for the rest of the country. We should have a remote learning strategy for each constituent or each district. Let's say it being there is no internet connection. What is our strategy to ensure that these learners can still be able to access education during this particular lockdown? Are we going to be giving them worksheets and then they collect and then they work on some assignments given by teachers? They submit at a central location and then the work is attended to. Are we going to employ community radios if they are available. Are we going to even try to use USSD codes to your SMS codes, those ones? We can, because really it's better to be giving some form of teaching, some form of learning instruction, even if it's limited. For example, the syllabus coverage during a physical in a class, maybe the work that you would cover in a week, you could maybe cover the same in 2 weeks. You would cover the same maybe in 2 weeks if you are now employing these particular remote strategies. But for completely closing and not doing anything, I think this is very dangerous, because these learners will focus on other things and never come back again. So at the end of the day, if you want to keep these learners within within the learning space, we shouldn't let them go for all these months. They should be getting some learning instruction through a platform that is available in whatever community that they are in.
Government released some solar radios, Comrade Masaraure, and we're conducting lessons on radio, if I'm not mistaken. Has this facility helped in any way?
Yes, it did. It is. A few learners in some sections of our society. So, but do we have a comprehensive policy framework which can cover all the learners in Zimbabwe? My challenge with the approach that we have, it's so random. It's a random bombing approach. So a donor says, maybe I have radios. The government will say, okay, we need radios because people can use radios. Someone will come with an idea. Okay, we need that one. Let's throw it. We should sit down and come up with a comprehensive intervention strategy on what kind of remote learning are we going to give to the learners. Looking at the diverse backgrounds of our learners, looking at the nature of our societies, how diverse they are.
Thank you so much, Comrade Masaraure. When you speak, I'm picking up that there is need to have a more comprehensive strategy that caters for
so
every
at the moment, what we don't have is a broad strategy.
At the moment, we have no strategy, you feel? Right. And Comrade Kamaliza, you've mentioned that your school term is open right now. Everything is functional. Did you have any cases of young children, the age groups that Andrew mentioned, 5 to 12, getting infected with the virus? What is the status of even the vaccination processes? Are the teachers vaccinated in Malawi? And what is the policy around vaccination? Is every teacher supposed to get the vaccination, or it remains a voluntary process?
Thank you very much, Comrade. As for the vaccination policy in Malawi, I think when the country had received the first batch of vaccines, the priority people, teachers were included as one of the priority people to get the vaccine, because it in terms of the quantity, it was very limited. So teachers were also prioritized to receive the vaccine, but just like any other citizen, getting vaccinated was based on voluntarily, not like by compulsory. So teachers had an option whether to go and get vaccinated or not. Yes, despite that, we have managed to maintain our schools open up to now. As I'm speaking now, of course, learners are on holiday. The schools are on holiday, not because of COVID, but just like a normal end of academic year holiday. But during the time when they were in schools, of course, a few schools had registered some confirmed cases of COVID amongst students and also some teachers. But I think because the government had also put in place mechanism on how such cases could be handled, we were able to maintain our schools remaining open until they've managed to close normally. And also we're expecting that on the planned date, schools will resume normally.
Wow, thank you so much, Comrade Kamaliza. Now, as we come to the end of this conversation, as we wrap it up, what advice would you give to the Zimbabwean government, the Zimbabwean teachers, and the general public to say, what should we do? People are a bit concerned right now. Should we open schools? And some people are not really worried about COVID-19 because parents are saying children need to go back into school. It's been long overdue that they haven't been in school. We've had an extensive lockdown here in Zimbabwe, and the schools have been affected tremendously. We're expecting to open into the third term, but there's that apprehension in our society. So what kind of advice would you give to the teachers in Zimbabwe, the students of Zimbabwe, and the government in terms of direction to take? Should we go ahead and open the schools? Is it okay to have our kids in school with this whole COVID thing happening?
Thank you very much. I think, unlike other countries, I think Malawi has done well in terms of keeping our institution open amid COVID, despite many challenges schools were facing, because the government of Malawi had set some guidelines for the schools to follow to ensure that for smooth or safe reopening of schools. What I would say to the government of Malawi, to the government of Zimbabwe, is that I think education must continue. Education is a right, and education should not wait, despite COVID. Looking at what Malawi experienced during the time when schools were closed, and if we were to maintain the status, otherwise we could have seen losing almost the whole generation, because we could see a lot of things happening to our young ones. We could foresee that we were able to lose a significant number of our children. So I would suggest that I think education must not wait. That's the key message we can give. Education must continue, and I think based on Malawi's experience, I think ensuring safe reopening of schools, despite that a few cases of COVID cases will be legislated, especially in the boarding schools, where, for example, learners are boarding there. So, in short, education must continue. Otherwise, we should be able to mitigate some of the aftermath of the COVID, which may affect the entire generation if we are to maintain the status quo of leaving our learning institutions closed.
Right, education must continue, but I want to ask, what is the student-teacher ratio in public schools in Malawi?
Of course, the recommended teacher-pupil ratio according to government is around 1 to 60. But when one of the conditions during the school opening, which was set by the government, was to make sure that the teacher-pupil ratio is at 1 to 40, and that, considering the limited infrastructure in the schools, was not possible. But that had prompted the government to make sure that the schools should also operate in phases while all the schools were opened, to ensure that we maintain the teacher-student ratio at 1 to 40. But the recommended one, according to government, is 1 to 60. But in practice, we do reach extent whereby a teacher is handling about 100, sometimes even 150 students in a class. That's due to limited number of qualified teachers in the schools, and also inadequate infrastructure in the schools, and also in general the enrollment in the schools is also quite high. So though we had the recommended teacher-pupil ratio, but in practice, I think it has been a challenge.
All right, thank you so much. And over to you, Mr. Andrew. What recommendations would you give to our governments here in Africa in terms of schools reopening?
Well, the recommendation I would have for all governments is when teachers generally tend to say when teachers tend to say we need certain things to do our job, the response from people whose responsibility it is to give it to us is silence. And so what I would say is that the proper protocols have to be in place. So, for example, physical distancing, vaccination mandates, I would say, are probably the best solution for particularly for teachers and for students who are eligible in terms of age. Those should absolutely be available and accessible to everybody involved in going back to school. But also, just as what we were talking about before, I think communication is important because, again, even in New York City, we're in the biggest financial center in the world here in New York City, and we're about less than a month away from going back to school fully for the first time in over a year and a half. Again, we've done schooling in modified fashion for over a year and a half, and we still don't really have a complete picture of what that's going to look like given the Delta variant and all that. So communication is key.
All right, communication is key. Now over to you, Comrade Masaraure. What do you think the government needs to do? I know Zimbabwe's got a lot of issues that they need to deal with. The issue of teacher welfare, the issue of capacitating your teachers. You mentioned that even if schools would reopen, the teachers remain incapacitated. And sometimes it sounds like a broken record, but I think it needs to be restated. So what would you recommend as teachers to government to say this is what you need to put in place so that schools can open safely and that our children are safe when they get back into school?
Thanks, Yvonne. Obviously, I will repeat the obvious, that it's high time that the government engage in genuine dialogue with the teachers to iron out the differences with regards to the salaries. Because if these teachers are motivated, then we move to the next step where we are saying it is imperative that our government funds adherence to standard operating procedures, the same procedures that were produced by government in June 2020, for schools can be able to adhere. But then obviously we can safely open schools. But for them to be able to adhere, they need a lot of resources. Our government has told us that they have 500 million Zimbabwean dollars available for safe opening of schools. But we have a learner population of almost 5 million. And if we do the math, only $100 Zimbabwean dollars is going to be allocated per kid. That is less than $1 US per child. For safe schools opening. A mask, just one face mask, goes for almost $2 United States dollars. So it's not even enough to buy one face mask for a learner, what the government is availing. And the same government is now saying parents should come in. And we all know that these parents cannot afford because their incomes have been wiped and they're poverty. So government should avail enough support for safe schools open, also engage in genuine dialogue to resolve the salary crisis. But whilst we are working on those, the third thing is it is now imperative for us to consider opening all schools remotely using any form of remote teaching which is available so that our learners don't continue to lose learning time. But at the center of everything, it is dialogue. Then the vaccination program itself, it should not be random. After we should be having an education-centered vaccination program, which will target the teachers and all adults who participate in the physical school ecosystem. But also, let's also go to the parents and the guardians, especially the elderly who live with the learners of school-going age, because the learners will be safe because they are very young. But when they get back home, they will take the virus to their grannies who are not vaccinated. So our vaccination program should also be have a clear education-centered vaccination program. So that we protect those with underlying conditions who live with learners, with children of school-going age. We protect the elderly who live with children who go to school. So these are basic recommendations, and our government is it all in their records. We have submitted this countless times, but maybe they don't take education seriously, and we continue to urge them to take our education seriously.
I want to come to you, Andrew, and ask this question. How is government supporting learners when they go back to school in terms of the PPEs that Mr. Masaraure was talking about?
Well, in New York City, we've had our PPE supply has been pretty good. We've had masks, we've had gloves and wipes and all that stuff. But I think the biggest concern now is, and the biggest push now is to get everybody vaccinated who can be, because that's the biggest way we're going to fight the spread of disease at this point. If everybody's vaccinated, if enough people are vaccinated, there's not going to be the chance for the virus to mutate in a way that's going to be devastating to a lot of people. So, and there's a lot of hesitancy in getting vaccines to communities of color, especially here in New York City, who are not as trustful of the government. And on Staten Island, we have a much more conservative population here, and they are not as trustful of the vaccine. So that's really what our big push is now, is to get everybody vaccinated who can be. Because again, you know, everybody wants kids to go back to school. Most teachers, all teachers that I know want to be back in the classroom, but
Right.
But we need all of the things to do that safely. And the big thing is vaccines. That has to be priority number one.
Awesome, thank you. And in Malawi, how much of government is supporting PPEs for students?
I think for Malawi, when the government had ordered for school opening, there was a minimum package for COVID prevention, which was supposed to be followed by each and every school. And that had included, for example, ensuring that in a classroom, the ratio of teacher to students should be 1 to 40, but also the availability of safe water in the schools, especially schools in the rural areas. Primary schools in the rural areas had some limited access to safe water. So the government of Malawi ensured that especially schools in the rural areas are provided with boreholes to ensure that water availability is there, but also availability of hand washing stations in the schools to ensure that students as well as teachers, when they're entering to class, they're able to wash their hands and also sanitize and the like. So there are a bit of such hand washing facilities, and also a bit of soap, sanitizer in the schools was provided by the government, and also essential water hygiene and sanitation facilities in the schools. So the government of Malawi, through the Ministry of Education, also built the capacity of school members of school governing structures. These are the PTA, the school management committees, and also the mother support group, on how they can produce reusable face masks. So they were trained on how they can produce such reusable face masks, and also supported with materials on how they can produce them. So schools were able to produce some of these things on their own, and also distribute them to teachers as well as to students.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much for that update, and thank you to all of you for joining me in this conversation today. It was really enlightening, and I'm sure people were able to hear what has been said. Thank you so much, Nyaradzi. Well articulated, Comrade President Masara. Indeed, the unvaccinated elderly and parents with underlying conditions will be exposed if schools are recklessly opened. So, need for opening of schools, but also there's a need to make sure that everyone is safe. And as Andrea said, we need to get vaccinated so that at least we mitigate against the severe consequences of COVID-19. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you so much, Kamaliza. And thank you, President Masarode, for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Kamaliza. Comrade Masaraure.
Thank you, Yvonne, for having us. A great discussion. Good day.
Good day. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who have tuned in and those who are going to tune in later to listen to this conversation. We all need to take part in order for us to get to a place where our society is safe. And indeed, we do have challenges that we are facing. The vaccination process, we've managed to vaccinate slightly above 1 million people. And more needs to be done. But at the same time, like what Andrea said, communication is key. How are we going to proceed going forward? What exactly and why exactly do we need to move in certain directions? So that kind of communication is going to be necessary for us to be able to rebuild our society post COVID-19, or in the event that we don't get to completely do away with COVID-19, how do we live with COVID-19? How do we get our countries back on track? And how do we get our students back in classrooms so that their future is also certain? Thank you so much, Zimbabwe, for joining me. Thank you, Becky Dongo, for tuning in. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of day and keep yourselves safe. Mask up, sanitize, and exercise social distancing. God bless you and God keep you safe. Bye-bye for now.